Welcome back to Beyond Well with Sheila Hamilton. This is a program for people who want to learn more about our interior lives. And today we're going to talk about the importance of psychological safety in a thriving workplace. You see a lot of trends like quiet quitting and reports of job unhappiness. And this is a lot more true for women and other marginalized groups who shoulder the highest burden of job dissatisfaction. With the average person spending roughly a third of their life at work, I don't think we can afford to navigate our professional lives at the expense of our mental health. So today we're going to be talking with a world-recognized DEI specialist, keynote speaker, and business coach. But first, I want to thank our sponsors. Active Recovery TMS is so incredible in terms of looking at a person's whole health. They're not only able to use a whole new generation of antidepressants that are fast acting and really getting rave reviews with clients, they're also very skilled in the use of transcranial magnetic stimulation, which has been known to be effective in people who are suffering from treatment-resistant depression. So if you want to find out more about Active Recovery TMS, go to activerecoverytms.com. There is definitely one near you, as Active Recovery TMS is set up in order to help people in the neighborhoods where they live. And now our interview with Farzana Nayani. She is a business coach and she's a passionate advocate for the multiracial community. So Farzana, welcome to the program. It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I have now been working in this arena where we're attempting to try to talk with people in corporate America about the importance of mental health. Give me a little bit of background about your entry into this type of work and why you became so passionate about it.
Yes, I entered the world of understanding and intercultural awareness from growing up in a multi-ethnic and multi-faith household. My mother's from the Philippines, my father is from Pakistan, and being the child of immigrants of two very different cultures gave me some insight from birth that I didn't realize until later really came into play in terms of my passion and my efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right now, I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, and I work a lot with organizations, and I also coach individuals around how to create a sense of inclusion and belonging and safety and awareness for your own identities, especially those who are marginalized. In addition to that, my ethnic and cultural heritage has led me to understand I have some gifts around intuitive healing, which I incorporate in coaching sessions and also with the groups that do need some energetic reset and healing that I'm finding is common now with all the racial reckoning we've gone through in the past 3 years.
I want to talk about mental health specifically because I know that I've encountered some resistance when I talk about the need to integrate mental health into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm like, well, let's begin with it means everybody belongs, regardless of their neurodivergence on the spectrum, because we all have it. And so how do you talk to people about that?
People hire me, Sheila, to come in and make change and create transformation in organizations. And I'm all for that. And I'm a very strategic person. But I think when we only focus on that and don't think about the people who are a part of it, we really miss an opportunity. And what I like to focus on is how people are feeling, how they approach not only the work, but themselves. And we can't actually get to any type of business objective or strategy or outcome unless we go ahead and help support people. So in the work that I do, and I do a lot of work around employee resource groups, which are affinity-based groups in organizations around identities. If you're someone who identifies as LGBTQ+, or if you're someone who is Asian Pacific Islander or Black or whatever the heritage is, there are these groups that are formed in organizations. And what that does is creates community and allows for someone to feel more at home.
Right.
So that is a place to start as well.
There seems to be more success among companies who are willing to really support groups. For instance, The Gap has one for young mothers, which I think is such a phenomenal idea because they do have unique and really stressful situations when you're dealing with aging parents on the one hand and little kids on the other. I wonder how it is that we get these diverse groups talking to the C-suite where most of the change actually has to occur.
I was working with a really big organization. It's a household name, and their parent group was very, very involved. Their moms group in particular went up to the C-suite and said, "Hey, we really need to have flexibility at home. You know, our children are crying on our calls, and we don't have breaks in between." And that actually moved the C-suite to tears. And as a result, I was brought in as a speaker as part of a series, and it really showed that commitment from the executive leadership in understanding parenting and just what we're all navigating in these current times. I'm a mom myself of a 10 and 12-year-old. For a long time, I used to hide having kids. I think being a woman of color as well, I was just always hyper aware of looking ready and presented and a sense of professionalism. So the issue here is that because now we're working from home, some people have leeway around that. And now we're opening up the discussion around childcare a lot more, whether it be even reproductive health. So we're having conversations around menstruation and miscarriage and even transitions. So those things were not talked about before, but because these groups are there and also the conversation is one around mental health and belonging, we can bring up those really difficult, challenging items sometimes that haven't been brought up before.
So I want to know when you're talking with people about how these ERGs support well-being and mental health, what's your best kind of pitch for why companies should actually be investing in this?
There is a lot going on now around the great resignation and a term called quiet quitting, which is people not putting in above and beyond the effort, beyond their current occupation. And then there's something called labor hoarding, where employers are just keeping people on board but barely giving them any benefits or support. So all of these HR issues are happening. But what it comes down to is how people feel in their mental health and how they are productive or not based on how they feel. These employee research groups create a collective space that's safer for a lot of people. They see themselves in each other. They don't have to code switch and take turns in terms of like trying to norm against what the dominant and common identity is. And so what they can do instead is be more of who they are authentically.
Mm.
And what people have found is that that creates engagement and involvement and actually a lot of innovation. There's the promise of the opportunity as well. It's not just a sense of like reducing liability. It's also what potential and possibility there is. And that's the name of my book. It's called The Power of Employee Research Groups, How People Create Authentic Change. Because
Mm.
I really feel that that's how people can show up in their authentic selves, is if they have that space available to them within work.
Some of the really positive changes that you have seen. Certainly, companies are investing more in mental health benefits. They're trying to expand the reach of ERGs in terms of how effective they can be in getting new policies. What other positives have you seen?
There's a lot of advocacy around understanding people's identities. So when we think about even the political landscape and how it's affecting people, whether it be Roe versus Wade being overturned and people concerned about abortion care, and even when there was in the military the trans ban, there are ways that ERGs actually came together. So in the case of the military, the queer pride groups came together along with the military veteran groups, which exist in companies, and they banded together and created a conversation about that for people who identify as women or femme or need reproductive care around abortions. There are a lot of groups that came into holding space and conversation around how people felt around that, and then it pushed companies to make a stand. So it's interesting to see these groups collectively come together and then actually push policy with it within their companies or maybe in society. So I'm really hopeful that they can create like the microcosm of that transformation we need, or at least awareness that this is important so that they can have a sense of safety and positive mental health within their companies.
I think one of the greatest examples of that is what happened to ERGs in the aftermath of the George Floyd incident, and how many companies actually really invested in attempting to understand racial trauma and how they could support their Black employees. I was really thrilled with that. What I saw, however, was some of the other minor groups saying, we didn't get a big influx of attention. We didn't get, which is just exactly what happens every time that another group gets elevated and gets some special care. So how do we attend to that problem?
It's a really great point, a very insightful question. And with the aftermath of the tragic murder of George Floyd, there was a lot of funding and support for African American and Black employee resource groups. However, there was a lot of burden placed on them to help distribute that energy and effort into programming and into decisions. There's, two sides to it. In particular, with the Asian American community and Pacific Islander community, we've seen a lot of anti-Asian racism and a lot of violence and assault. And I would say probably 50 to 100 ERGs that I'm aware of actually got formed in that period of time, the last 1.5 to 2 years, as a result of awareness around it, which is tremendous. But again, I actually feel terrible that they weren't there before. So at the same time that we're celebrating the creation and the growth of these groups, we also have to say, where was the support before? And I want to note that, because there's this dichotomy of being grateful and being a person of a marginalized identity, noting that, look, we've got to accept and receive this support as it's coming in. But, that means we were invisibilized up until that point. And to the point of other groups that aren't being looked at, I write a lot in my book about the Native American community. And at the time of writing, there was the unearthing of the bodies up in Canada of children who were part of residential schools. And I grew up in Canada. And so this was super painful for me to read and hear about, because it meant, again, that there was not that recognition of that beforehand, even though that group has been going through trauma for quite some time. Yeah. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think at least it's a start to hold space for all of that.
Tell us a little bit about some of the keynotes in your book. I'm really excited to read it.
In my book, I talk about conceptually how change is created. And there's a really great diagram in there called ERGs in Motion. And it was created by Jimmy Hua and Rodney Hill. They're part of the Asian Leaders Alliance. And what it talks about is how movements come in waves. And I really like that, because it's organic and it allows us to not feel like we need to have hockey stick growth all the time. Sometimes there's the peak of a movement and then it fades. And I think these groups have those moments, right? Which we've seen. So there's the understanding of the concept of ERGs. I also go into the operating, like, effective best strategies of ERGs and how that can be done. I have a 5Ps model outlining people, purpose, planning, processes, and priorities, and how those are the foundation of running an ERG. And then I talk about the future and opportunities and possibility for them. So there's a lot in there. If you're someone who's into the nuts and bolts, there's that. If you're someone who looks at kind of the theory behind it, there's also that. But I'm a very practical person, so I also connect it to the current times and what we're experiencing as a whole and a collective. So I really enjoyed writing it, and I'm so glad it's out, and it came out just a few months ago.
I want to talk with you about your personal journey. Was this something that you always did, or were you ever in a job that you didn't feel fulfilled?
I was always in some form of education, but I think there was the grappling of what part of the community am I serving? Am I serving people who are trying to reach the community, or am I serving the community itself to try to find placement in that? In the past, I've worked as a business counselor for underrepresented communities, helping with micro enterprise and economic development. I also worked for a chamber of commerce doing the same thing and helping broker big deals between businesses and larger corporations. But what I found is that there's this bridging that needs to happen and an understanding. And that was the common theme among all of those positions, was that I was this interpreter, if you will, of what people are understanding and what they need. And so I feel like honing in on diversity, equity, inclusion, and healing and mental health is a way to help also create that interpretation for people. We aren't just robots and working in organizations. We're people, we're humans, and there's a whole dynamic around how we are, how we're feeling that plays a part in this. So I really care for people, and that's been a big part of what I do.
It sounds so in line with what I actually feel is sort of the next transformation for people who are working in corporate America.
I would add that uplifting a person's identity starts with us feeling comfortable within our own skin. And at the same time, the environment we're in being safe, that we can show up in that way. And that's the constant ebb and flow and challenge. But also, it's our chance to really feel into who we are and understand ourselves, and also create that space so people after us, whether it be youth or other people who don't have the same access, they can also experience that. So that's my hope and wish also with this work.
Farzana, it was wonderful to spend some time with you. Tell us again the title of your book and where people can find it.
Yes, my book is called The Power of Employee Resource Groups. You can find it at your local bookstore, on Amazon. Also, you can get it at Barnes and Noble, and it's also online at Target and Walmart. So wherever you get books, you can go ahead and pick it up there.
Again, Farzana Nayani, it's been so wonderful to spend time with you, Farzana. Take good care.